Okay, I'm here. Sorry, a little bit of technical difficulty there. We got a new platform that I'm using and stuff is in different places, so excuse me for that. Welcome, everyone. This is episode 106 of Forensics Talks, and today my guest is Kevin Weiner. We're going to be talking about the BPA Black Box Study and something that's come up quite a bit in the past, I guess, couple of years, or I've seen some presentations on it from different people. And a very important topic. Just before we get started here, I'm going to go through the usual, and that is first off that there is a comments box. So if you are on YouTube or Instagram or one of those places, you should be able to see us talking here, and there's some comments, and you'll be able to see some other people's comments. So first off, let us know where you're from. If you're watching from overseas or whatever city you're from, let me know. Always love to see where people are watching from. So just put in the city or the country or whatever that might be. Also, if you have any questions, go ahead and post those as well as we go along. I will be vetting them in the comments section, and then I can, propose some of those questions to our guest today. If you can always like and do the subscribe thing. I'm always interested in getting the word out to more people. So great, great if you can help me out that way. And just a couple of little things. One of them was the IABPA conference. So part of the reason why our guest is here today has to do with the recent IABPA conference in Kansas City. It was a wonderful little conference. It was great to see all the people that are there doing some really amazing work in bloodstain pattern analysis, doing a lot of work in many different areas. And I had a quick chat with Kevin during that, and as a result, he's here today. Also, I just wanted to say that there is also another conference coming up. It's the IAFSM conference. So that one is the International Association of Forensic and Security Metrology. That's going to be held in San Diego starting November 3rd. So it's just around the corner. I'll be teaching the basic laser scanning certification course on the Sunday. And during that week, there's going to be some really interesting things going on. So the big one that I'm really interested in is the IED and fire scenario that's going to be happening on the workshop on the Monday. So San Diego County is, I believe it's might be the sheriff's office there that's going to be helping out, but we're going to be going there, doing like a burn room kind of thing. And we also may be blowing up some cars or some things like that. That is always interesting for sure. So if you are interested, just head over to iafsm.org and you can find out some more information, and maybe we'll see you there. San Diego is a lovely place. So it's always an excuse to get out into some sunny weather as the weather starts getting colder here. All right, let's get into this. So let me get my notes up. So let's talk about Kevin Weiner. So Kevin is the director of the Kansas City Police Crime Laboratory, overseeing all aspects of laboratory operations. He holds a degree in cellular and molecular biology from the University of Michigan, and he began his career in the DNA section of the Kansas City Police Crime Lab. Over the years, Kevin has expanded his expertise across various forensic disciplines, including trace evidence and bloodstain pattern analysis, eventually stepping into leadership roles within the lab. But in addition to his directorial duties, Kevin actively contributes to the forensic science community through his involvement with the Organization of Scientific Area Committees, that's OSAC, for forensic science, and the Center for Statistics and Applications in Forensic Evidence. He also teaches forensic science courses at Washburn University, and he's participated in pivotal research studies like the NOBLIS Black Box Study that we're going to be talking about today. But he also frequents a lot of the conferences, and he's doing presentations and a whole number of other different things that I know he gets involved with. So let me bring him in here, and there he is. Hey, Kevin, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. And I'm just thinking back. I think we met in Chicago. We might have met before that, but I know for sure we met in Chicago because I remember seeing your presentation there. Well, I don't know what your earliest recollection is, but was that where I first met you?
I think so, yes. I had seen a lot of your work, some of the papers you've written, but I don't think we had met in person yet.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think have you been to a few IABPA conferences since then?
I have, yes.
Okay, right on. Well, let me ask you, let's start with you. I want to get a little bit to your background. And so usually people think I'm going to ask them about, their recent work or whatever, but I like to go way back. So I want to know about Kevin Weiner when he was a kid and he was, was he the science kid? Was he like the creative kid, the artsy kid? Like what was your sort of mindset back then?
Science.
Oh yeah.
So biology, chemistry, physics, I ate all that up. I love science, going through high school and even into college. So studying biology and chemistry, but really not having much involvement in forensic science at all. I had a great uncle who was killed in a robbery, but I can't say that was any sort of motivation for me to want to get into forensic science. Ideally, or what really happened is I graduated in '97 with 2 degrees and not know what I wanted to do other than wanting to do science. And this was in the time before the show CSI. There wasn't a lot of hype about forensic science. But my girlfriend at the time, now who is my wife, who we've almost been married, a long number of years, her dad was in forensic science. And so that's kind of what opened the door and to the field of forensic science. And then the rest is kind of history, they say. I got a job 3 months out of college, and I've been working at that same place ever since.
So were you up in Michigan, or were you at the time like?
I was in Michigan at the time when I graduated, and then my father-in-law to be took a job in 1996 down with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. And that was 6 months before I graduated. And my wife, who graduated from the University of Michigan 6 months before me, moved down there too. So I wanted to be with her, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I'd never been to Kansas before other than once. And long story short, that's kind of how I got involved in forensic science. So I can't say that I was, since day one, I was interested in forensic science. I can say since more or less day one, I was interested in science, but not necessarily forensic science. I just didn't know how I wanted to apply what I knew.
What was your transition like at the Kansas City Police, like in terms of getting in? Kind of what were your first like roles and duties?
Certainly, yeah. So in 1997, at that time, the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department was looking to expand their DNA testing section. And so I was hired as a DNA analyst. But at that time, they were in the process of building a new building, which hadn't been built yet. So they had me do all sorts of things to bide my time. So I was becoming more familiar with crime scene investigation, trace evidence. They try to throw a lot at me and saw what sticks. We eventually moved into a new lab in '98. We were doing RFLP DNA testing at the time, and then we transitioned to STR DNA testing. And so I was a DNA analyst for RFLP for a while, and then a DNA analyst for STRs. And then in about 2001, I moved over out of the DNA section into the trace section. And at about that same time, I was also became more or less like the technical leader of the Bloodstain pattern analysis program that we have at the lab.
Okay. So when you started back then in BPA, have you noticed a trend change, difference of attitudes in the BPA community about how you approach cases, sort of the science of evolving around then? What are some of the notable differences between then and now?
Yeah, I mean, I can say with confidence that, we had very little written down, 25, 30 years ago, as far as procedures, policies, SOPs. The training program wasn't nearly as robust. There was very few standards that we can go off of. Swigstein was just at its infancy at that time. And I got to be involved with that process toward the tail end when Swigstein became no more about 10 years later. So, I think in my career, the 26 years or so in BPA, a lot has changed, and obviously I've seen a lot of improvement.
Okay. And at the lab right now, like do you have a small team of people that are trained in BPA? They go through the courses or that sort of thing. And do you do training for BPA analysts?
Yeah, we have now another technical leader. Her name's Nikki Blackwell. She also is on the OSAC as well. So she is doing far better job than I did in that role. And so she has other people in training. We have some people that are trained just to document bloodstains at crime scenes, and then other people that were working on and getting trained all the way to be an analyst.
Okay, great. Well, I saw Nikki, and I know Nikki for a few years now. So hi, Nikki. You did a great job at the conference. Thank you very much. Well, let's start leading into the whole NOBLIS study and maybe how some of that got started. So, or let's do this. Maybe let's talk about maybe what some of the issues were that prompted the study. Like, what were some of the problems, or what was it? Some of the NAS studies and things like that, or reports that came out that prompted this? Like, in your mind, how, what can you tell us about what got this going?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of some of the history is any field of forensic science or even any field of science, you'd want to know information about accuracy and reliability, right? And so I think going forward, that seems to be an obvious need for any field. The NAS report definitely accentuated that need. And then there was additional studies that were completed by Michael Taylor, who has since passed, Paul Kish, and Nikki Osborne, Mark Jeremy, and a few others that were also assessing the reliability and accuracy of bloodstain pattern analysis, also incorporating, trying to see what the effect of contextual bias was in that information. And so there was still a need to do a full large-scale study to assess that accuracy and reliability, because people, especially at crime scenes, you don't know if you're wrong because you don't really know what the ground truth was. And that should be a goal for all forensic scientists, to be right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. And what can you tell us about NOBLIS? Like, for people that don't know, what is NOBLIS, and what is its duties or roles in this regard?
Certainly. So this was a federal grant by the National Institute of Justice that was awarded to NOBLIS to provide the study. Austin Hicklin is the lead author and was the leader of this study. He is a NOBLIS employee. And since I did work on this study, I was a contractor for NOBLIS. NOBLIS is a large business. They have headquarters I'm aware of in DC, but I'm sure they have other structures or buildings elsewhere in the world. But they have a capability of applying all the technology and all the wherewithal from a software standpoint. They have the experience with these large-scale studies. They have experience with managing grants. And I was just absolutely blown away with their capabilities of being able to put a large-scale study like this together. Because me, as a subject matter expert, and likewise Paul Kish, who was also a subject matter expert on the study, we understand like the bloodstain pattern side of things, but the behind the scenes of actually putting a study in place and the front end and design, and then also all the statistical work that they did on the back end was nothing short of impressive. And we had pulled in numerous partners. I think there was more than 9 people that were actually involved in this study, and they did an enormous amount of really high quality work.
Yeah. Okay. So now everyone on the paper, those were the core people who were sort of involved, like, from the beginning.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Great. Well, let's start getting into the in the paper here, and maybe talk about like what was done and that sort of thing. So the paper is called "Accuracy and Reproducibility of Conclusions by Forensic Bloodstain Pattern Analysts." And I guess I should say, there's a lot of, and even when you presented, the one thing that's complicated is that there's a lot of caveats on the page. So it's like, you make a statement, but it has to be justified, or it has to be backed up, and people need to understand the context in which you're presenting this. So what can you well, let's do this. Maybe if you can just walk us through the basic premise and the design of the experiment, and what you're trying to do.
Sure. Would you like me to explain what a black box study is in general?
Let's do it.
Is that a good place to start?
Absolutely.
Yes. So generally speaking, when a scientific study is done, there are many, obviously, different types of scientific studies, but 2 of them are a black box study or a white box study. A black box study tends to be really straightforward. It's something like a test where a participant is given essentially a question or a task, and the result is their answer. But the reason why it's called a black box study is it's unclear how the participant arrived at their answer. It's kind of, the box is dark, it's hidden, it's mysterious. You don't know what's going on in the person's mind. All you knew is somebody took a test and they had a question and here's their answer, but you don't know why. A white box study is designed to understand their thought process to how they reach their conclusion. And so the black box study, it provides some hints for how an analyst reach their conclusions, but it doesn't provide, it wasn't a one-on-one conversation with participants to say, all right, so for this sample, you reach this conclusion. You don't get to that point. And so that's the two different types of study. Again, a black box study is more or less like a test where you have a question and an answer, and a white box study, which has not been done in BPA, would be one where you're given a test question and then you have a conversation that explains how you reached your conclusion.
Okay, good. So with respect to this particular paper, maybe just giving us a little bit of background of how you set this up. What kinds of, obviously the questions, or images, or a number of things going on. So yeah, what can you tell us about the way that you designed this particular test?
Certainly. So the test is, like I said, designed mostly by NOBLIS, but the idea is reasonably simple. We give a whole bunch of participants the same information, and that information is in the form of photographs. All we then also provide is simply basic information about the photograph. Was the surface that was photographed a horizontal surface like the floor, or was it a vertical surface like a wall? And then basic information about the type of surface. Was it painted wood, or so on? And with that same information, then we see whether or not they reach the same conclusions or opinions as other people who participated. And for those samples where the ground truth was known, where we believe we knew the answer to how that pattern was created, we compare their results to the what is known to be true. So it's a combination of reproducibility, which is a comparison of responses among different participants for the same question, and then also accuracy, which would be a comparison of a participant's response to what we know to be true.
Okay, so again, just to be clear, some of what you had were a number of experiments that you ran, and actually, I think right behind you in that room there, you did some work. I think
Yes.
you had a few people helping you out with ground truth photos and things.
Yes, it was a 120-hour in a week ordeal with 5 or 6 people. It was all hands on deck, but it was fun.
Wow. Okay. And then so those, obviously you know the mechanism, you know everything that created those. So those you can actually check, did people say it was something completely different, or they're wrong? And then the other images, like you're saying, they could be crime scene photos, or things where maybe you don't know what the ground truth is, but you can check to see, well, is everyone in agreement, or are people saying completely different things in a real world crime scene scenario or photograph? Okay. What about the criteria for how you classified, like what you would consider to be a wrong answer versus, well, maybe not a wrong answer, but it's still like an acceptable answer versus, they nailed it right on and it's, a correct answer?
Yeah, so then I'd have to kind of break down a little bit more in the test design to get to that, to answer your question. There was 3 types of responses, or ways in which we gathered information. The first one would be is providing a photograph, and then providing a series of prompts that are basically different mechanisms of how the pattern created. And the person would be asked to say definitively, yes, that's how it was created. It's included, that's possibly how it's created, or an exclusion or excluded, meaning negative, that's not how it was created. So that was one approach. It was basically a prompt for classification. Another prompt was along the lines of questions. So it was more or less yes, no, or essentially a maybe response. And then the third was a little bit more complicated, and those would be more of a short answer response. Kind of think of it as like a tweet, so to speak, where you do get a little bit more understanding of, first of all, what they describe the pattern to be, their characterization, so to speak, of the pattern, and then also their explanation of how the pattern was created from a mechanistic or classification standpoint. And so those three different approaches, the classification, the questions, and then also the short answers, was the source of all the results we obtained. And then all those responses were then analyzed to, depending upon the type of sample, whether or not we knew ground truth, and the statistical evaluation of that is truly remarkable. So for instance, just in the questions and the classification prompts, there was over 33,000 of them that had to be evaluated and compared. And then the short answer responses was somewhere around 1,700 or 1,800 short answer responses. So it's a pretty large data set to go through.
Yeah, definitely. I saw that. A lot of data to be looked at for sure. So in terms of the results, like for example, on the samples that you created where you have sort of a ground truth, I'm just reading here, it says 11.2% of the responses were erroneous. And maybe let's start with that one, and then we can maybe you can quantify or qualify that number and what it really means.
Yes. So we create a pattern. We watch it being created. We have a video of it being created. We have every reason to believe we know how it was created. So we know what the classification should be, meaning the mechanism by creation should be. So we essentially know what the right answer is. And we potentially then also know what the wrong answer is. And so if we, for instance, know that it was an expiration pattern, and a person responds that an expiration pattern is excluded, it could not be an expiration, will that be an example of an erroneous response? Or if we know, for example, it's an expiration pattern and we prompt them with, is this an impact pattern? And they say yes, that's also an erroneous response. So I think I'm answering your question as far as trying to identify what an error is now, so that that percentage that you had just mentioned was just kind of a holistic, a number related to the number of times in the questions or classification prompts where we encountered an error.
Okay. Now, were some of the patterns and images that you were providing, in your opinion, were some of them like, these are not clear, like there's going to be some, there's going to be, you knew for sure there was going to be some issues maybe around some of them, maybe some of them were very, clear to you, like, most people are going to be getting this is an easy one kind of thing. But like, did you select a range of different types of photographs because of their difficulty or their simplicity?
Absolutely. In fact, that was part of the experimental design. Not only did we create our own patterns that we attempted to try to be representative of what one might encounter in casework, but that's also precisely the reason why we incorporated casework photos. It's very common for a bloodstain pattern analyst to have never attended the crime scene, but to only look at photographs and make some determinations. So we think between the combination of the ones that were created essentially in the room that I'm in right now, and then those that were from casework examples, we feel like that was pretty representative of what a bloodstain pattern analyst may encounter. So yes, some were very little information. So the expectation is, one could argue that's either easier or more difficult. If you're not given much information, that means potentially you're just less definitive, or less, you can't exclude and you can't be definitive about it, and your response is the middle ground.
Right. Yeah.
And in some other studies that NOBLIS has done, for instance, like a fingerprint study or so on, it's where the expectation might be that you can identify a person's fingerprint. The inconclusive result tends to be less common, right? But in bloodstain pattern analysis, where you're not giving a lot of information, maybe included or a maybe response is an appropriate response.
Well, and I think an important point here is that, in, if you're working in DNA or when you're trying to make an identification, that's like a true or false kind of answer. And in this study, that's not what you were after. You're talking about, okay, what kind of pattern is this? Or some of it might be mechanistic, some of it might be just a classification or whatever, which is very different than saying this is who the person is. So I would say it's much more complicated on the BPA side.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's definitely that as an issue. In terms of the crime scene photographs that you provided and looking at the reproducibility, what can you tell us about maybe some of the findings there?
I mean, just generally speaking, reproducibility is pattern dependent. Then you could argue it's person dependent, so participant. Some patterns, there was actually very few patterns, relatively speaking, that there was a unanimous response that was correct. But you have to be mindful that the caveat to that is, how correct. If they say, yes, it was created that way, or maybe both of them are arguably correct, right? So there was clearly a relationship between patterns on carpet and a lot more errors. And then some of those mechanisms like drip stains that are a little bit more straightforward, right? And so it's a pretty broad range of errors. And so you can't say that the error rate for, the whole field is a certain percentage. But you could kind of guesstimate that under some circumstances, the error rate might be higher for specific patterns, right?
Right. No, that makes sense. And just getting back to something you said just before, you had, and I remember you talking about it in your presentation, but there were, let's say, some people in the study who were major contributors to the error. They were making a lot more errors than, say, maybe some of the other people. Right? Is that true?
Yes, and just to be crystal clear here, as the people who were making the study, we don't know who the participants are, so there's total anonymity there. All we have is some basic information about that we captured from their background, but not sufficient to identify any individual by any means, right? But you're correct that the error rate varied from participant to participant. There were two in the study. You'll see if you get a chance to review it, or the people watching this get a chance to read the study, which I strongly encourage. There were two participants that were considered outliers. One that contradicted known cause on about 32% of the prompts, and they accounted that one participant. Again, I don't have any idea who that would be. They accounted for 5.7% of all the errors in the entire study. And there were a total of 75 participants in the study.
Okay. What I'm curious about, you've been through a lot of the details, and there's a lot to absorb here. So this is not like a one read and you got it. I really feel like I had to go through it like a couple times and think, or not a couple, even more sometimes, read through it. Okay, what does this actually mean? How does this relate to something else or whatever? So this is something you're going to have to sort of pull yourself aside with, and don't have the kids in the background running around. So, but I want to ask you, what were some of the more important points or the takeaways for you? Or were there any oh geez, like moments that you thought, wow, this is something that we didn't expect?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be very careful not to read too much into the study, meaning that you can't say that a specific percentage is the error rate of the whole field. But I think there's clearly some areas of improvement that are required in the field. And one of the most glaring ones is there is no standard operating procedure or method or procedure, or however you want to call it, some sort of best practice recommendations for when you see these characteristics that is necessary or sufficient to classify a mechanism this way. And so it in that sense, it's somewhat not surprising that there are errors, because you could argue that nobody had a procedure and not everybody was using the procedure. And so if you were to give some very vague direction to somebody to accomplish something, and you give that vague direction to 50 people, they're probably not going to accomplish it all the same way. I mean, I know that's maybe oversimplifying it, but that there is a problem with that, right? And that's something that at the OSAC level and in the whole field, we are working together to try to get something, a standard in place for that specific purpose. That would be my primary take home message.
Were most people, when the study first came out, what was the initial reaction to the study? I mean, did you have people, freaking out all of a sudden because, hey, what are you saying to us now, or looking at this, or was everybody like, yeah, we get it, it's most people fairly accepting of it?
I would say the response was mixed. And I've got the paper right here in front of me, but from Michael Taylor and Terry Labor, Paul Kish, and Lynn Owens, and Nikki Osborne, that was published in 2016. And their error rate was in the very similar 11% range, just at a very general, broad standpoint. Their study was a little bit different, but very effective. And you would think that, wow, 11% is not good. There are a lot of caveats to the limitations of what that 11% means. So there were some people that were very few, but some people that are like, this is not a science, and that's not what this study shows. And then the other people were like, well, we already knew that number because there was this other study from before, and then everything in between. That's I don't know everybody's opinion about the study, but I think hopefully everybody's opinion ultimately got to, okay, so now what? Well, we got some room for improvement here, and let's work together and get that improved.
Have you heard of this study now coming up, for example, at trials where there's like, BPA analysis done or whatever, and either prosecution or defense is taking this now and saying, hey, do you know about this study? Or like, are they bringing it up and now, having the BPA analysts discuss this on the stand?
Yes, I'm aware of expert witnesses being asked questions about it on the stand. Yes.
Okay. And I'm just wondering if anyone out there was concerned when it first came out, like, oh, geez, now you're exposing us and you're doing, I wonder if there was any kind of that reaction. But I mean, for the better, I mean, any forensic science nothing's perfect. So, there has to be something established there. And I think that's part of the important part is, you guys have sort of opened a door now to a very important area that says, hey, look, under these conditions, these are the kinds of errors that we can get when we're doing bloodstain pattern analysis. So I think that's the important part. But have you heard of anything that was like a backlash thing or anything at trial or court that was a problem?
I haven't really seen much in the way of what I would consider a backlash. I think an expert in bloodstain pattern analysis should be familiar with the research that's been done and be aware of it. And so one who testifies in bloodstain pattern analysis probably should be aware of the study. And I think if somebody is asked questions about the study on the witness stand, I think that's obviously a very fair question. And they should be able to articulate in some way how that study relates to the work they did on that specific case they're testifying about, and how that study may not be directly related.
How do you think the study might have changed if the analyst, for example, visited the scene? Like you had a crime scene investigator. They go to the scene. They're able to see. They take their own photographs. They come back. They do a report, and then let's say, for example, it goes through a peer review or technical review or something like that. Do you believe that some things might have changed in that regard?
I would imagine so, and that was articulated in the conclusions and discussion section, because obviously that's a quality assurance measure that most analysts have after they've generated their conclusions. Somebody qualified then reviews their conclusions and provides that check and balance. So obviously those participants in this study did not have that check, so to speak. So yeah, that is a limitation of one of the limitations of what you can learn from the study.
Okay. And I mean, is that something that I mean, is there any follow-up to this now, this report? Like, are you guys looking at doing some different things, or is NOBLIS saying, hey, we need to try part two to this, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, we've attempted to get funding for follow-on studies, but so far been unsuccessful.
Okay, so it really comes down to trying to get the funding for this thing, yeah. Um, so let me just see here. In terms of the participants, you mentioned that you were collecting some information regarding their backgrounds. And so did you see any trends with respect to people who might have been very new versus people who might have been more experienced? I don't know if they were asked to specify what courses they might have had or whatever, but is there anything you can say about the analysts themselves?
Certainly, certainly. So what we haven't discussed yet is, what qualifies somebody to actually be a participant in the study. So the primary qualification is somebody that has testified or done casework in bloodstain pattern analysis within 2 years of participating in the study. So these are the people that are active practitioners, so to speak. So that's one point. And then in the background of the initial questions before they actually start the study itself, there's approximately 25 or so questions that we asked about their training, their experience, and so on. And so to get to your answer, Eugene, it was, statisticians way smarter than me had tried to crunch all the numbers to see, okay, can you see any sort of relationship between errors and education, training, experience, and so on. And other than some cryptic portion that's a subnote in the study that I would ask that you would just look at, and I can say honestly that I do not fully understand it. With that exception, there is no obvious relationship between training and experience and how well they performed, or the number of errors, so to speak.
Okay. Another thing that came up, and I mean, you've been around, so the SWIG groups, the OSAC. I mean, you're directly involved with those as well. But in the paper, you guys talk about terminology, and that this is important in terms of highlighting issues with terminology and classification standards in BPA. So how critical was or is the role of clear definitions and standards in improving the results, or even in improving the discipline?
I think they're absolutely critical. And that's not just in the United States, but worldwide. If two experts are literally not speaking the same language, or using the same terms in the same way, there's going to be problems. And I think there was some, even though this black box study was not a white box study, based upon some of the short answer responses and based upon some of the responses, there was some hints or pretty clear indications that there were some semantic issues. Rather than mechanistic issues, it was just simply, proper usage of terms. And just to back up a little bit, to try to make it crystal clear to all participants in the study, not only was each participant instructed to use the terms that were published in 2017 by ASB, the American Academy of Forensic Sciences Standards Board, but also that when their cursor hovered over a term, there was a pop-up window that gave the definition, with the attempt to be as crystal clear as possible for what the meaning of that term is. And I will say, even then, there is some confusion. And in the OSAC, currently, we are looking to try to improve the terms with information that not only we get obviously from this black box study, but other studies as well. And then participants worldwide and the issues that they see with some of the terms and trying to get better. If I can give you one example, so like if there was simply a photograph of a drip stain, which is basically the result of blood falling, like somebody's got a small cut on their finger, blood drips, falls to the ground, and produce a drip stain. It's a very basic stain. When we prompted, is this spatter? It was Some said yes, some said no. And it's because it depends upon how you were trained. If you're looking more of a taxonomy, this drip would be more of like a passive thing. If you were looking for more from a mechanism, was this a droplet of blood that's in the air and landed on a surface, then that's considered spatter. And so that just opened the door for that conversation, which is among the most basic bloodstain patterns out there. But you can see, or it was very apparent in the study, in that example and many others, that there was semantic issues, and helping like globally trying to, reset or clarify or establish, what those terms mean or don't mean, is definitely something that the field needs.
Yeah. You were talking about, like hovering your mouse over. So just so everybody understand, this was all web-based. Like, what can you tell me about the platform that was used for this thing and what instructions were given?
Yeah, and I should have mentioned that before, so thanks for bringing that up. So the goal is to provide photographs to everybody in the same format, right? And so the easiest way to do that, especially when you have participants throughout the world, is not to have them come to whatever location and look at them simultaneously. This way, a web-based approach using software that NOBLIS designed and developed, that web-based approach enabled them to see those images and view those images, allowing for that consistency among participants. They all were given the same information and were given as much time to look at that one sample during the entire period, which was many months long. So let's see, I think I've covered, so it's web-based. They're looking at images. And then obviously their responses are captured electronically through the web. And then that data is then to NOBLIS for them to do the number crunching.
Okay. And but again, it was just basic instructions. It's fairly wide open in terms of their responses. There wasn't a lot of, how could I say, constraints put upon them or anything like that in terms of how they could respond, or there wasn't a workflow, or there wasn't a chart that they were following or anything like that.
Well, there was those three different types of prompts. One would be a classification. So they'd be given photographs and then given a specific mechanistic term and determine, they had three options. Is it definitive? That's how it was created. Excluded? That's definitely not how it's definitely not how it was created. Or included? It's possible. So that's one. So they had to pick one of those three for that type of prompt. The other prompt, which was a question, would be yes, no, or essentially maybe. And then the more open-ended one was the tweet, which was more or less the short answer responses, which allowed them to type out a more of a narrative to describe their opinion.
Okay.
So it wasn't completely wide open. The one that was wide open was the short answer response. Okay. But we had to capture the information consistently, and there is no standard way of reporting in bloodstain pattern analysis, which is another challenge. There's no criteria to specify the strength of your opinion, and so in the creation of the study, those people that were involved in the study, including myself and many others, right, we're trying to come up with a way in which what are some of the answers that could be provided.
Okay. Well, I want to ask you about kind of like what's next for you, like what's going on. So you mentioned that, you're going to be looking at maybe getting funding to do another study. Can you talk about what you would like to do, or is that like a secret?
I mean, I probably shouldn't, but I think it probably should be pretty obvious. We've established that there are some errors. It's really trying to establish a methodology, a study that would help determine what are the characteristics that are necessary and sufficient to classify a pattern in a certain way. And there's a lot of studies that are going on that are attempting to do that in many different ways. And it's just a matter of kind of bringing it all together and ultimately getting to a standard document that can be used internationally. And so everybody is following the same recipe, so to speak, or same rule book. And currently that's not the case.
Okay. A couple of things that I want to ask you about. And I'm going to state them now so I don't forget about it. One of them has to do with bias. and how people's biases and things like that, and how that may play a factor in some of the responses that they give. The second one has to do with maybe other areas of BPA. So for example, some of the software programs that are out there right now that are looking at area of origin, or maybe some cast-off analysis and things like that, which are perhaps I'll say, yeah, I think in fairness that they're probably a little bit more objective, because you're not really trying to say what kind of pattern they are or whatever. You're just trying to do an analysis, so long as that they're suitable. So let me ask you about bias, and potentially how bias might play a factor in this study. I mean, people weren't given context. They were given a backstory to, hey, this is what happened, and this person went there and shot this person. So it was fairly open. But what are your thoughts on bias as a contributing factor to errors?
Oh, well, not as much as my thoughts, but you can read published studies on it. Those done by Nikki Osborne and many of her colleagues. And there's been many studies where if somebody's given some biasing information at the beginning, even either while they're looking at a pattern or before they're looking at a pattern, such as, the victim's been shot, and you'd have to refer to those studies to see statistically what that means. But clearly, from that study or those studies, there was some. The study demonstrated that a contextual bias can affect conclusions.
Okay.
And so to counteract that, there's numerous different approaches, but the one that the Organization of Scientific Area Committees in Forensic Science, the BPA subcommittee, has embraced is the one by Dr. Dror, D-R-O-R. His is basically trying to use linear sequential unmasking, especially a modified version of that, so that you control the information. You look at the patterns independently of the information. You form your conclusions about the classification based upon just the characteristics of the patterns by themselves. And then you provide additional relevant information. Task relevant information versus task irrelevant is very important. Unfortunately, when many individuals go to a crime scene, sometimes they're given very relevant information and sometimes not. And so controlling that information flow can play a role, and is something that approach is something that has been embraced by the OSAC BPA subcommittee in a document that is currently out for review by the American Academy of Forensic Science Standard Board, ASB.
Okay. When you did your presentation in Chicago, I remember you were talking about establishing uncertainty. I think it was for your lab, about looking at area origin and software, that sort of thing. And I'm just wondering if there is a need for something like that, maybe on a greater scale, something similar to what you've done with this NOBLIS study. Maybe getting a number of people in and working with 2 or 3 different types of software packages, and then doing a similar kind of thing with different types of area of origin analysis or cast-off pattern analysis. I don't know, just your thoughts there.
Absolutely. I think especially for bloodstain pattern analysis work that's done in an accredited laboratory like here in Kansas City or many other laboratories across the world, there's many standards associated with when a numerical result is reported, that there is uncertainty of measurement that is also associated with that, and that uncertainty of measurement is known, and how it's calculated, or at least addressed in some way. Now, some of those uncertainty of measurements have to do, like in the United States here, there are some legal limits. You can think of blood alcohol for drunk driving. You could think of barrel lengths for legal or illegal firearms, or you could think of drug weights and how there are statutes or laws relating to what's legal and what's not. Now, in BPA, there isn't, and there shouldn't be, or there couldn't be. It can't be like if you're, somebody is illegal if they're struck 3 feet from the wall, but legal in 2 feet. It just doesn't make any sense, right? But I think even though when you're reporting a number, you have to understand how what is the uncertainty. Are you comfortable that the person was struck when they were in this location, or location much larger, right? And being able to quantify that in some way. And absolutely, I think that I know that there's many software packages out there that can do area convergence or origin calculations for impact or cast off or other mechanisms. And I think it'd be wise that all of these packages are following some same way in which they're calculating uncertainty.
Yeah, and I
So
think
that
that's
way the user can properly apply it and understand it.
well, I think that's an important point. And right now I can tell you that there are at least three different ways that, things are being calculated, or how they perhaps come up with some of the results and statistics that surround the area of origin analysis. And there's things that they probably should be doing that they are not doing, like in terms of reporting and providing extra tools for uncertainty and error. That's quite interesting. And then I guess even, and I think this came up at one of the OSAC meetings that I was a part of, but it had to do with even something simple like calculating area of convergence, like manually, if you're doing like tangent method or something like that. It's not all clear sometimes. There are some people doing things a little bit differently manually in how they calculate or specify something. And it'd be nice if there would be one kind of method that was very clear. It says, okay, we're going to do it this way, and that's the way we're going to decide upon. And then this way, you could do a nice study that way and, see what people are actually getting.
Yeah, I think there's definitely room for that. And I think also, just to be clear, many people that are not familiar with bloodstain pattern analysis at all think that all of bloodstain pattern analysis is the area convergence and area of origin calculations and the mathematics, and that definitely plays a role. And it's very quantifiable, and I completely agree, Eugene, it's more objective in that specific scenario, but that's not the only that's not the only type of pattern that's encountered in probably less than 25%, if not even much less than 25%
I think
of cases.
Yeah, I think even less than that.
It's important, and it's critically important in that scenario, but we have to be very careful to not relate that to uncertainty of the whole field of bloodstain pattern analysis, where that is very specific aspect of it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think the study here that you guys have worked on here applies to the majority of work that most bloodstain pattern analysts do. That's for sure. If there are people who have questions, or if they have any comments, or maybe they want to get some feedback or something like that, you actually gave me an email address that I can show here. And what's the bloodstain@noblis.org?
Yes. So right after the study, or during the studies being published, NOBLIS established this email address to answer any questions related to the study, to make sure that, essentially just that, right? And so it's a one-stop shopping for that. NOBLIS also has a website for the study that provides a link to the report that was generated in response to the grant solicitation, right? Then it has a link to the published study in the Forensic Science International Journal. And then it also has essentially a brief article that kind of summarizes it for potentially maybe some lawyers or judges or non-scientists, so they can help digest it a little bit easier.
Okay. And I have your LinkedIn, but with your permission, is it okay to just let people know if they wanted to reach out to you personally, if they have any questions or anything? Could I just
Certainly.
pop that up? Okay. Yeah. So if anyone wants, got Kevin's information here. He's director at Kansas City Police Crime Lab. And, if you have any questions about the study, or maybe formulating your own study or something like that, maybe he can help you out with that, or even interpreting some of the results that might be helpful. Okay, great. Well, look, Kevin, I want to thank you for your time on this thing. I know this has come up before. I saw a presentation by Paul Kish, who was also deeply involved in this, I know, and he presented on this some time ago, and I saw that. And this has been coming up on more than one occasion, so it obviously has had a significant impact. But it sounds like there's definitely a lot more to do here to dig into the details and do further studies. So I hope you're gonna get that grant. We'll see.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I feel like even those studies are already been published, obviously my role and those authors' role is to help continue that process. And to be able to answer some questions and also receive feedback, not only about future studies, but also, what are some of the strategies that people are using worldwide to classify patterns and the characteristics that are required or not. And I would be happy to, and I'm reaching out worldwide for information like that, so that if the OSEC does generate a document and that document does get approved by the ASB, that it has an international flavor to it. And especially when you're talking about terminology, you want to make sure that even though people that might speak a different language, literally, other than English, right? But at least when we're talking about bloodstains and bloodstain pattern analysis, we're all on the same page.
Okay, how far along is OSEC on maybe developing something like that? Or I mean, on we've got the ASB standards and like the terms and things like that. So, but is that being looked at again too?
It is. So
Yeah.
the terminology was published in 2017. So terms like to get revisited every 5 years, or any document likes to get revisited 5 years. So we're kind of past due on that. But many of us on the OSEC are responsible for updating those terms. And we also feel it's appropriate to not only update the terms, but provide a classification standard or best practice, so that, because many of the terms are related to the classification document, and they're vice versa. So they kind of seem like they go hand in hand. So Eugene, it's a pretty big animal to try to tackle, and it takes a team to do it. But I'll tell you that we're making progress. Obviously, we'd like to make faster progress, but nevertheless, we are making some.
Yeah, well, when you have that many heads in a room, there's a lot of opinions, and you need a lot of patience too. So, yeah, no, I totally get it, but definitely worth the effort for sure. Well, look, Kevin, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Great input, great insight, and I think you guys all did a great job on this thing. I think it's a very valuable study and information for everybody in the BPA world. So, do me a favor, hang back. I'll come back to you. I'm just going to make some closing comments. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, everyone. Well, that does it for this particular episode. Yeah, some really, if you're a BPA analyst, you do have to be aware of this study and the other one that he mentioned from Nikki Osborne. Michael Taylor, I believe, was also an author on that particular one, but 2 studies for sure that you should know about. So thanks for everybody back in the background there, and we will be back again sometime soon, but there's some travels and things coming up, so it might be a few weeks, but rest assured we will be back and much more to do here. So hey, all the best. Have a great Thursday, everyone. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.